discretion is advised as we cover many an insane movie and numerous cult TV phenomenons. Now, are you ready to get jacked up? Are you with us? Then listen on.
And welcome again, ladies and gents. And welcoming back to the show is Robert Cohen. How do you do?
Oh, hey, man. I am here with you and glad to be here again.
All good. So, I figured, eventually we were going to kind of talk about the cast of a popular film or TV franchise. In this case, we said, let's talk about the best roles of the Star Trek cast, how they own these roles they're best known for, anything else we've seen them in that they excelled at,
Yeah.
I'm sure it was their 10 seconds of fame,
Yeah, some of them turned those 10 seconds into quite a few years.
Right. In many ways, these roles are kind of like, that's 10 movies altogether,
Mm-hmm.
right there. So, what was your... When did you first see it? Did you see it when it was first rerun, or did you actually see it live on the air as a kid?
So, since it's just the two of us, I think we'll do pretty well because my love of Star Trek goes back to my childhood. So I was born in '63,
Nice.
and when Star Trek was originally on, it was a little over my head. So I remember distinctly my mom and dad and maybe one of my older cousins who was visiting watching Star Trek and me saying like, oh no, I like Lost in Space. That's my show. Because I'm, like 5, 6 years old. I didn't know anything. But by the time I got to junior high school and Star Trek was in perpetual repeats, I fell in deep and became a hardcore Trekkie before any movies, before anything else. So I had I think I had a babysitter that I just drove up the wall till she took me to the mall to buy me that first Star Trek blueprint set because I just had to have it immediately. I had poster books hanging up. I had calendars. There was the very first Star Trek shop was in Manhattan. It was called the Federation Trading Post.
Nice.
And when we lived in New Jersey, I had my dad take me into work with him in Manhattan, and he let me walk over and explore this Star Trek gift shop where I bought my first Tribble and, things like that.
Sweet. I was the same way. I would collect occasional action figures. I was growing up mainly in the Kirk's movies and Next Gen, so I instantly got into the whole swing of things along with Star Wars.
Did you have the Miko action figures with the spinning transporter?
I had a transporter, but it was more one of those that it would do the sound effects for Next Gen era, and it would use the mirrors to make it look like the figures were actually disappearing. And I was like, oh, how cool.
Nice.
And so I got the whole gist of it, and it's just inevitable. Anytime you just saw anything else from that point on, Stargate, Battlestar Galactica is like, yeah, even Buck Rogers, just heavy Star Trek influence,
Oh yeah, no, they were all influenced. And I was pretty much of a snob by then. So, if it wasn't, really good science fiction, like I almost said sci-fi, and then I figured Ellison was going to kick me in the teeth, so I stopped. But yeah, no, I would look down my nose at Buck Rogers and Battlestar Galactica for not being, serious enough.
But yeah, Lost in Space and even Forbidden Planet's a good start where you're just like, yeah, you're so used to that whole just 50s style, everyone is exploring, and there's a handsome captain, and there's a very beautiful, attendant gal, and
yeah, speaking of the handsome captain, you could almost say that Leslie Nielsen was like that macho precursor to Kirk,
Yeah, absolutely. But years before, and similar trajectory, it is like,
yeah,
being serious in all these infamous movies, and then years later doing the whole, well, now we want you to do the same shit you've been doing all your life, but now you're doing straight-faced and a deliberate parody now. So
yeah, exactly.
Talk about an evolution of trajectory.
Forbidden Planet to Naked Gun, and from Star Trek to TJ Hooker. But that wasn't the parody. I guess later it would be things like
Boston Legal, yeah.
Boston Legal and Miss Congeniality, right? Exactly. So speaking of that, that was what I was going to say about acting to begin with. Is the very first Star Trek series set the tone, and I thought people would talk about great acting in Star Trek, and if you were going to talk about it, I think people like what the last person people might think of for great acting is Shatner. But I was so enamored of that role as a kid that you look at the series and how it's grown into all these other shows, and yet that first show sets the tone, and so does Shatner to a certain extent, because even though he was hammy and overacting a bit, there is an element of melodrama and tense excitement and a bit of over dramatization of things in Star Trek that really highlight the danger or the excitement, and Shatner was just perfect at that. He just, brought that kind of melodramatic gravitas to everything. That
it's an interesting predicament where it's just like, okay, everything can vary, just by tone or within a second. And like you say, is like, well, okay, so the plot might not work, but the idea is great, or the production is excellent, but the acting is, yes, a little hammy this time around. So yeah, it just gets to that point where you're just like, okay, well, either way, everyone's earning their keep, but it just won't necessarily, land with every audience. But God, the amount of effort,
And if your rubber suited Bem, your bug-eyed monster isn't really that believable, but the cast reacts in a really authentic way. I'm damn serious about fighting this guy in a T-Rex mask. Then you follow along and you believe it and you go with it because the acting is making you sort of care.
1,000%, yeah. It's like, this is where we are.
So let's stick with the first series for a second. I already said what I thought about Shatner because he was my hero as a kid. But I think of all the shows, that first cast with those 3 to 4 main characters, McCoy, Kelly, Doohan, and Nimoy.
And the fact that they all knew each other to some extent, they had been guest starring on the same shows.
Yep.
But yeah, just all very special people, like literally Michelle Nichols and Takei and Conan are like the only ones left with us from the original cast.
Mm-hmm. So who for you in that first series stands out for you in terms of their actual, acting chops?
It's got to be a tie, definitely between. I mean, obviously, yes, Shatner's the ham as it is, but I'm even though I kind of really like the characters of even Sulu and Bones more, the acting wise. I mean, I definitely am more privy to Nichelle Nichols and her portrayal of the curious and yet very well spoken, Uhura, and then obviously just Leonard Nimoy could not have been a better pick for Spock. It's just they all just both excelled at that just patient yet quiet mentality, and I think they just deserve a little more effort because obviously Spock's a fan favorite, but I mean. I really, each time I was like, I wonder how he put across all that perplexing, nature for someone who otherwise is supposed to be an emotionless, half human, half Vulcan hybrid. And, Uhura, was a very progressive character to portray, at that time. And, not be, just a beautiful person, actually be just, a really, cool communicator who has to relay all the danger and peril that the entire ship will have to endure later on. It's like, I mean, and again, just quiet roles that they have to add little subtleties to make it either be intense or reflect the social commentary that the episode is going to be talking about that episode.
Right. Totally agree. Those characters like Uhura that weren't often given a lot to do, even in their smaller bits, they brought gravitas to what they were doing. And then in the few moments where they actually got to do more, they really played, they would hit it out of the park. But in terms of the people who were given a lot, you can't escape the fact that, especially what we know about Vulcans now, that and Nimoy just pioneered all of that. He found all that it's not just emotionless, it's a struggle with emotions. And so in some ways, he was the most emotional character on the show. Watching him be torn apart when like those emotions were breaking out because he got hit with spores or whatever.
Yeah, and bleeding green blood. And
yeah. You could be on the verge of tears for him sometimes because he just, he could act the shit out of a paper bag. He was just damn good at it.
Oh, so good. And I think it was just so cool. I mean, I'm sure you've heard the stories how he and Shatner hated each other initially, and then it's like they got in a brief tussle, and then they're like, you're a stubborn son of a bitch. I like you. And Shatner's the same thing. Oh, you're arrogant, but you're pretty cool, dude. So it's so funny how they pretty much put aside their differences, and obviously it makes sense why everyone was just so close to everything after a while. Where it's like, okay, I get it. Long shooting days. I understand how George Takei had just as big an ego as Shatner and similar kind of trajectory. There's like so many appearances just playing his comedic real life self versus a rare dramatic role in a TV miniseries. And, and like you say, Nimoy, and DeForest Kelley, they were doing the same thing Shatner was doing initially, where they would do the whole just guest star on a Western of the week or Mission Impossible type show of the week. And, Nimoy was even more interesting because, I mean, he was part of the MI cast for quite a while, and, same kind of deal where it's like he has to silently yet, explain the dangers that the crew will be facing this week and pretty much give his general gist on it. And it's like, it's just so funny how he can do the same thing every damn week and it doesn't become tiresome or repetitive. It's just the right amount of just nuance. And DeForest, like you say, is just interesting how he, he's having to be the sci-fi science connection to all this whole thing. And at the same time, argue with Spock and make it funny. He's like, oh, how can you be so emotionless? How can you be, devoid of political connection to this whole, planet, which is torn with, ghosts or genocide?
Well, you bring up an interesting point. Just first to agree with you that, the banter between the characters and their camaraderie was brilliant, especially with Spock and McCoy feuding. But you bring up a point that's true with sci-fi across the board there. I'm going to go ahead and say it. Who cares? Sci-fi has that issue.
It's all right. I kind of said.
Yeah, and we're Trekkers, not Trekkies. Okay. So.
Oh, I'm going to go for that angle. Damn. Okay.
So, but in all sci-fi or SF or whatever you want to call it, there is an issue with actors and the jingoistic lingo. I think it was Harrison Ford that is famous for, barking at George Lucas you try to act these like ridiculous lines of dialogue, 50 parsecs to the quantum, zone or whatever
the hell you're going to tell me to do. Yeah.
And Star Trek in particular, every week it's another jingoistic kind of technical, well, if we just reverse the calibrations on the, what, Captain, we might get out of this polar extreme problem. And, that there's a whole maybe just genre of acting where you have to learn how to say that kind of mumbo jumbo in a way that's really believable. And Star Trek really is one of the main places where that happens a lot. And, some of the people in the history of the series have pulled that off a lot better than others, but definitely in that first series, Doohan and McCoy, Spock and Kirk, they all just really carried you through that stuff and made you believe it.
Yeah, working on Lucille Ball's expensive soundstage, and like you say, it's they came from theater backgrounds, and I think Doohan might have been like Shatner, where he's Shakespeareanly trained, and he's coming up with even some of his 2 cents, and he was actually part of the Canadian forces that stormed the beaches of Normandy, so he already kind of had that whole tactical angle, even if he didn't realize it, and so like you say, yeah, I mean, Star Wars, you had even before he got to green screens, Lucas had said before, I'm not good at directing actors, I'm a documentary filmmaker, I just want to do enough coverage and make epic shots. And it's like, well, that's great, but the actors are going to be annoyed anyway because they don't know if they're doing any good. You need some of that feedback, and if you can't give it to them, they're going to get even more annoyed, ego or not. And it helped that this is episodic TV, so yeah, they're literally just doing Western or detective show in outer space. Just our new case of the week. We gotta get some crazy religious zealot off of a planet before he, like, I don't know, unleashes a disease or some shit. Yeah.
And I guess the shows too also were just like those Westerns and other shows, because every week there'd be another guest star that they would be working with. And
1,000%. Yeah. Even the guest stars would often say, I'm not much of a sci-fi or horror guy, but I want to work with so-and-so. So, and I think if anything, the Trek fandom opened up that, more mature than Star Wars, where everyone's like, oh, how can Harrison or so-and-so not like working on that movie? It's like, well, you don't get it. What you see just because it's a good movie doesn't mean necessarily that it was fun to make. So you got to put that all together. And I think Trek is enough in pop culture fandom that, and getting an idea of how the acting varies somehow opened up the portal, no pun intended, on how everyone's like, okay, I can see why, why this works a little better, and how some actors are just, if you're just confident in it and you do your own backstory and decide how you're going to talk and walk in a scene, that's literally all you got to do. It doesn't really matter what's actually going on or what you're even saying, and I mean, I do understand it. I did take some improv in college, and it's like, it really is freeing. You just start, you do less venting and, oh no, you be less of a Debbie Downer or worrisome case, and you become more, just go with the flow, man. Just that's when we're buying our plane ticket. That's when we're buying food from the grocery store. That's what we're going to do. Let's do it. Let's get it done.
You made me think of something. I wonder what you think of this. Like, sometimes actors really respond to not just, oh, I'm making another, crime show or something, but I'm making something that I believe in. And, I think Star Trek, as much as any show, if not more than most, has, the Roddenberry theme of idealism and humanism that is something that, if you really care about it and believe in it, I wonder how much you think that influences the actors, that at the end of every episode, the little morality play or whatever it is, that they're really doing their best to send some sort of positive or uplifting message, and that gives them something maybe to work with in terms of their acting.
I think you're definitely onto something, because I mean, you've seen how a script reads. It is like a giant action scene, lasts just literally one sentence in a script, and you got to just do all that planning and what shots will be where and what angles will be on what person at what time, and so yeah, I mean, pretty much they're stuck with just the dialogue, and I definitely would see a lot of them say these are tales of hopes, these are morality plays, these are no different than basically an episode of Combat. Just, well, we're in space, we're in goofy suits, but same general vibe. It's just, and
they're
I know as they went on, Next Gen, had so many episodes that kind of felt like could have been one of the Alien movies or something like The Thing, and they were kind of just doing a lot of the same as the original show before they got into their own groove. And I know the main writer, Ira Stephen Barr on Deep Space Nine, was very vocal, and he was like the only guy who could win an argument with the over-controlling producer, Rick Berman, who was known to be kind of prickly. And he's like, we're not Roddenberry's track, but in a way we are kind of winking at it. We're basically wagon train in space. We're going around. If we stay on just the giant space station, it's going to get old quick. There's no reason for it to be static, especially if we got all these different cultures, kind of like Babylon 5, just coming in and out. And, and Voyager's kind of the same way. It kind of goes back to the whole Lost in Space mentality. It's like we're doing kind of what we did on Next Gen and the original, but at the same time, will or won't they get home? And Enterprise was the most complex because that went for so many changes, and even people initially attached to it before they, just kept changing it out. And they're just like, they were just, at that point, they had just worked them to death. And they're just like, well, whatever it is, it's now Crimson Tide in space. We're a giant submarine crew, and we don't have transporters, and we don't have shields. So we're showing how we got to Kirk's time, and yet we're still kind of next gen light. So how do we win?
Well, one thing I thought we might do is go chronological, but since you brought up Enterprise, I'd like to I'd like to go into that a little bit, because I have to say, in terms of acting, for me, it's the show I'm going to dismiss the quickest.
No, it's fine.
So, two things about Enterprise. So first, I was looking at the casts, the ensemble cast for all of these, and I have to say it's the one show where, although they all may be competent, I don't find any of them standing out for me at all.
No, that's fine. I had a total love-hate relationship with it growing up. I'm like, okay, it's Star Trek, but it feels more like Star Wars or Aliens instead of Star Trek. And like you say, I mean, I didn't have a problem with Scott Bakula, but it took a while. All those characters were very shallow growing up. It's like, okay, they're kind of there, but it's kind of like a lesser season of a legal, or like you say, a cop show where you're like, I should like these guys, but it's just something that's not clicking. I don't know.
Right. Here's the thing. Then you mentioned Rick Berman until the last season, because when the producers quit, and the writers, or however it happened, the writers were just given free reign for like that last season. Oh my God, that last season is great.
Oh yeah, I and they did so many other ideas that would have not worked. They wanted to bring in like an alternate universe Kirk, and they're like, oh, Shatner's expensive. I'm like, why would you bring in Shatner? He doesn't look at all like he does.
Right, but they did that in the last season. They had an episode. They had a multi-part episode at the end that had a Tholian web. It had a Gorn in it.
It was great.
Had a multiple universe in it. I'm like, they were throwing in the kitchen sink, and suddenly I'm like, now I'm excited. This is like really fun.
Even the next gen characters appearing in I got some complaints, but I was like, I was glad, like you. I was like, season 3 and 4. I was like, okay, I like how they're showing Khan's people as well as Data's father's, creator, and then they're doing mixing in all this other stuff. They're comfortable, and it makes a difference when you got a 2 to 3 part episode. You actually want to see it conclude. They brought in some guys who had written the books. They had Manny Koto, who would later go on to work on Dexter in 24, amp it up, make Archer more of a badass. And see, Berman said, Archer, he's kind of a Han Solo type, and I want some X-Files mystique. I'm like, well, the X-Files mystique is pretty apparent. You only got some of their writing staff, but Han Solo? No. Not any of that. See, Han Solo is a guy who works for himself and then reluctantly helps out the heroes. Archer is bound by his, militarized exploring Starfleet, before Starfleet exists. So,
absolutely agree.
I mean, don't get me wrong, Bakula kind of has a similar appeal kind of to Harrison Ford or even Richard Dean Anderson, but not to call him the same character makes no sense to me. So, I mean, and a lot of the actors, like you say, to build on your point, a lot of them were just saying, we had literally no notes to work on, and Connor Trenier, who played Trip, and
Malcolm
Park, and some of the other guys, they were all pretty talented, but at the same time, it was like they don't get anything to do until like near the end. And Dominic Keating, I think, complained as like, I'm just going to go with the flow. I've only auditioned for this show multiple different times, so I'm just thankful to be working on it. And I know John Billingsley was kind of the scene still as the alien doctor, and he literally had nothing to go on either. He was like, I interpreted it as an outer space chicken, and I instantly got notes. Stop fucking doing that.
Yeah.
And so he's just had to be quirky, but not be an outer space chicken. So.
So, we'll just sum it up to the fact that they weren't given a lot to work with till the end, so it's hard to judge their acting.
And yet I light up whenever I see him. I'm like, hey, is that dude? But at the same time, like you say, is like, I'm sure even they, it's like they had fun working on it, and at the same time they're frustrated. It's like, well, what do you want exactly?
Yep.
Because you're not telling us much to do, and so we got to just drift through it. And I heard that all of them were very nice, though. Like, they all got along with each other, and they'd make kind suggestions. And if the writers didn't want to go that way, they just said, "Okay, well, that's what you're the boss. Let's do it."
Right.
So I guess just going a little backwards. I mean, like you say, just the original just had a standout cast, and all of them kind of just mainly just parodied themselves and did just TV work from that point on. But I also just think Ricardo Montalban, that amped up his career. He's really the only one from the movies I want to talk about, because I mean, he had Fantasy Island and the Planet of the Apes movies, but it's like, yeah, it forever will be ingrained in my mind as Khan. That was an amazing villain growing up.
Yeah, totally. It's the best movie by far of all the original Trek movies.
Yeah, because, I mean, they had to use the Star Wars effects library to help them out, and at the same time, they had to totally change the whole tone. And, whenever some of the other movies or shows would try and imitate Spock's death, I would just cringe. I'm just like, no, stop. It's not a homage anymore. It's practically stealing.
So you've probably heard there's a character related to Khan as a member of the crew in Strange New Worlds. That's going to be weird. I have no idea how that's going to pan out.
Yeah. I mean, I'll get there in a bit, but yeah, I mean, I'm down for whatever, because I think they're doing a good job in that at least they got an agreeable cast, and they're showing young Spock working with young Pike. And so it's
if we're bouncing around, and since we brought that one up, I thought we'd go chronological, and maybe we can go back to that. But I'm going to say something about Strange New Worlds. I don't think I've been as excited about a Star Trek show as any, because what we got to see of that crew in Discovery was amazing. I think Anson Mount plays Pike perfectly.
And same deal. He was on a cowboy show called Hell on Wheels. So yeah,
I love him. And the fact that it just like Enterprise touched on all that old original series stuff, Strange New Worlds is there with that crew, touching on all the stuff we know, back to the formula of having, one mission per episode for most of them. I just am super excited about it. Oh, Rebecca Ramjin as number one is awesome.
Yeah.
Spock's pretty good. Was it my mom? My mom or somebody who thought that he wasn't dark enough?
Oh my God! But
he's
yeah,
a little too white.
It's weird. Yeah, he's like the grandson of the late great Gregory Peck. And
oh, is he? Well, then he gets a pass.
and like you say, Rebecca Ramjin, it's been a long time coming. Ever since Femme Fatale and the X-Men movies, she's kind of just been quiet, just only doing occasional TV work and comedies. And it's like, yeah, it's cool to see her in an action role again. But,
and I don't care about his freaking skin, freaking skin tone. I just
okay, boomer.
That was funny that my mom was like, "Wait a minute." I'm like, "Whatever, Mom, it's fine."
Yeah, I'm the same way. Whenever I have my folks or even relatives of note that someone's showing their age, I'm like, "Well, yeah, no fucking shit. Yeah, sure, they're 60 something, but they still look pretty good, or as good as the makeup will allow." So. Yeah. It is what it is, and I don't even see the point of complaining if, again, you love what you see. So, what's the problem?
He's nailing the role, so I'm super excited about that show. I cannot wait.
I think it's going to turn out pretty well. I think everyone's excited for that in Section 31, and I mean, we've already talked about Michelle Yeoh on here, and
that's right. I forgot about that.
Well, it just goes back to the whole deal of, well, it's going to be something.
I also forgot when I was bringing up casts. I forgot to bring up Picard, but let's go back to to Next Generation and work our way forward.
No, it's fine. So that's a good segue. I mean, you had a cast who had been in all kinds of things. You had Patrick Stewart, who had been in Dune and I, Claudius.
Oh, come on. He's like one of the knights in Excalibur.
Yep, and Excalibur, and so there you go, just all kinds of movies and shows, and then he gets to play Picard, and he was famously kind of pretty strict that first year, and then kind of just came out of his shell, both as a person and as an actor, just realizing, hey, this is goofy, we can have fun. And Jonathan Frakes, he had done North and South, and since then he's now just a giant TV and miniseries director and producer, still directs a lot of the track shows. And then Marina Sirtis, she had been on a bunch of British productions and even goofy stuff like Death Wish Free, and then just jaw-dropping awesome role as Troy, and then Michael Dorn as Worf, just immortalized that role, just instantly recognizable voice. And his prior gig from that was just being one of the officers on ships and one of the Apollo Creed's bodyguards as an extra in the first Rocky. So, just dynamite. And Brent Spiner, always light up whenever he's on a show or guest starring on something sci-fi or crime related. But I mean, privy to that, he was just a hardworking actor who was just on Night Court a few times, just.
Yep.
And can't forget about, obviously, LeVar Burton, years before reading Rainbow and directing TV. Also, he just had Roots and a bunch of other TV movies of the week.
Mm-hmm.
Jordy Lefort and Gage McFadden, same kind of deal. Just to think that Rick Berman wanted to fire her and then they had to convince her to come back. She's like, all right, just don't make me deal with that asshole producer.
Right.
And same kind of deal. She was a dance coordinator, was even involved a little with the casting of some of the Jim Henson movies like Labyrinth. And then she kept trying to do movies, and for whatever reason, they would keep cutting her parts out. Like she's playing Alec Baldwin as Jack Ryan's wife in Hunt for Red October, and they cut all her scenes out. And she's like, you bastards. What do you need me for if you're going to just cut out all my scenes? So,
right.
Like you say, I guess you would say this is a dynamite cast with.
Did I lose you? With what?
I guess you would say this is a dynamite cast.
Oh, I thought you said with something. So, yeah, I agree, but I also think this might be our first chance for a little comedy here. So after I just say, we went from Shatner as the lead to Picard, and I think clearly why that works is, Shatner was a bit hammy and overacting, but Patrick Stewart really also has that Shakespearean British authority.
He's playing a French man, and
yeah. So they need somebody who's got that kind of authority to carry that Kirk tradition, but in a new way. But other than that, this show, I was a little, I didn't get into it that much when it first ran. I was still kind of
going up against so much competition, yeah.
And I was like, there's so much of it, and I'd watch it occasionally. And there are some people I think who are great and stand outish, but let's get into the fact that people do like to rib Star Trek, and this cast has a number of people in it that people like to tear into. I don't think any of them deserve to be torn into, but we could joke a little bit about some of them.
Yeah, how they didn't know what they were doing the first year.
Well, let's talk first about poor Wesley Crusher and how much
I can't believe I would gloss it.
People were just like, oh my God, this kid is just so dorky and doesn't belong on the set.
Oh, yeah. And I see him now, and he's guesting on all kinds of shows like Dark Matter, Colonel Mines.
He's got the gravitas now. He's got the clout. He's very together. But back then it was like, and I don't even think it was his fault. The character was just made out to be.
He would even ask the director's motivation and everything, and they'd be like, shut up, kid, doing good. I'm like, well, no, I'm not doing good. I know when I'm bad. And yeah, I'm so glad when he was on Gates McFadden's podcast, he went even more into how his parents were just terrible people. Like his father basically just kind of intimidated him deliberately, and his mother gaslighted him, always would put him on the spot, and only wanted something to do with him just because her kid was becoming famous. He goes from Stand By Me and then other cult movies like Toy Soldiers, and then to this. And there was plenty of times where he would not even bother going to a casting audition if he knew damn well, he just would probably not get it. And so tough shell to come out of. And he just fortunately, he like many of these guys, embraced kind of a comedy background as well as doing appearances as himself, and even wrote comic books and did voiceovers. So yeah, I mean, just pretty cool.
It's good to remember that he was in Stand By Me, because he did do really good characters as a kid. He did pull off good acting as a kid. So
yeah, I think he's a very underrated kid actor. And like you say, I mean, Wesley, those first few years, they didn't know what to do with him except just have him whine, and then everyone at the end of the episode says, "To your room," and said, or "Shut up," you know. And so it's just like, it's kind of like, I call it the Kim Bauer on 24 effect, where it's like the character is becoming a plot device and nothing really wrong with the performance, but because everyone's irritated by the role. And I wasn't growing up, but I can understand why. I mean, he became kind of the Jar Jar Binks of that thing, but don't get me wrong, there's way more worse characters as we go on in this franchise.
Well, he gets a pass then. He's forgiven. And I want to ask you about Whoopi, because Whoopi's serviceable in that role, but the role itself is so heavy-handed that it's just easy to kind of poke fun at it.
Well, no, I know what you mean. Like, it was stunt casting, and I mean, she brought what she needed to, but you know, at the end of the day, she's still mainly a comedic actress who, aside from Ghost, you know, didn't really do too much drama. And I still don't mind seeing her. I know she's going to make a cameo in the upcoming Picard, but I see what you mean, where it's like they kind of didn't at first know if they even wanted her to be part of the cast. But yeah, she's just a recurring cast member. And even John D. Lancie, who played Q, you know, he didn't know what he was going to do, because the pilot was kind of awkward, and he was just like, well, if you want me to ham it up or be serious, I'll do either. It's just, you know, clue me in on what you want.
All right, so favorites. I'm going to have to say the standout actor on this show for me is definitely Brett Spiner.
Oh, totally. And so hard to play a cyborg.
Well, in a sense, it begins to show a theme where, for me, this is my own theory, that the reason why 7 of 9 was added to Voyager is they realized that every captain before had a character who was struggling with their humanity. And so Kirk had Spock, and
we have Warfare and
Data,
yeah.
And so then they gave, Janeway 7 of 9, and that character really worked. And, but Spiner, he could be comedic, he could be serious. He also did, just like Nimoy did, just brought all of the conflicts of an emotionally conflicted and also overly rational character that couldn't access certain parts of their own being that they wanted to. All of that came across, and they gave him so many opportunities to explore that both seriously and comedically.
And he does so good, considering how they didn't know if that was going to survive that first year,
Yep.
So much just hate mail even before it's on, like, oh, you guys are going to fuck this up. And so, even other actors who had to play, I think the most annoying character by today's standards probably is Barclay, but I'm not saying the performance is bad. Dwight Sults, he just comes from A-Team and does all the other kind of fun TV work, and is like, he's doing his best playing a kind of an egomaniac who's, an introvert socially and fascinated by technology. And even Denise Crosby, she had done movies like Pet Cemetery and everything. She comes onto that, and then has to play both Dasha Yar and, her offspring through a time portal. And so it's pretty cool how all of them had to kind of just grow into it naturally. And it helped that I know a lot of them attributed that his name's not coming to me, but there was a director who was best known for being in Rebel Without a Cause, and so he's an actor turned director, and he really got them comfortable into their roles. And
nice.
That says a lot, because you get to episode 3 doing the offensive Code of Honor episode showing a fictional African tribe, and they just had to take it all with a grain of salt. It's like, okay, much like any B movie or, again, Twilight Zone or track show, you're not going to hit it out of the park every time. There's going to be a script that's a little too silly or could use maybe a rewrite on how it ends, but it's otherwise, just do your best. And I can understand why they gave them a little free rein to even come up with story concepts or even direct a few episodes once in a while.
Yeah. So,
but like you say, yeah, Brent is good, and I really adore Michael Dorn. I've just always thought he was just a fascinating guy, and whenever I see him pop up in commercials or do cartoon voiceovers, it's like, yeah, of course he's here. he's he's a pretty cool actor.
Yeah, he's a rep. He has a great rep for being a super nice guy too.
Oh, totally. Now, dare I ask, what do you think of Hugh? Not Q, but Hugh, the Borg who has to become human, Jonathan Del Arco.
Oh, that like kid Borg who was like half and half and
pops up later on Picard, and he's had a huge career since then. He's guest starred on so many other shows.
I thought that was a great episode, and I thought it was a great part, and I thought he did a good job.
Oh, totally. He for the longest time was then on The Closer and its spin-off Major Crimes as like the medical guy, and he kind of reminded me of the guy who played Castillo on Supernatural. He's like a more lighter skinned Latino actor, and he just was really good at just really sinking into it, just being he can just change his tone just with a little small adjusting in his tone of voice. And I mean, The Closer already is just a dynamite show just because it's just a very clever crime mystery comedy show mashup, and they had a lot of Star Trek cast and crew on there, so that's a fun spot the talent. But I mean, I think even out of all the recurring guest stars, I'm really the most fascinated by Ensign Rowe portrayer Michelle Forbes. I just think she's also just dynamite, and she was wise to, when they asked her, for what later went to Kira on Deep Space Nine, they wanted her to come back as that Bajoran character, and she's like, nah, I'm good. I know how this business works. I love my time here, but I do not want to get, pigeonholed or typecast. So,
right.
Just goes on, does all these other dynamite roles, 24, Homicide, Life on the Street, even Battlestar Galactica, and just really good at playing just characters who can just change at the tip of a hat or have a gray morality to them. And you look at her resume, she's always got some big movie that she's part of the ensemble or a recurring guest role on some big TV show, and the list goes on. New Amsterdam, Chicago Fire, and even just bit movie parts like Escape from LA, and is like awesome.
Yeah, it is interesting how some of them, depending on how they handled their career in Star Trek, would either go on to lots more diverse stuff or would then end up getting pigeonholed.
Yeah, totally. It seemed like Marina and Dorn were kind of the first to go into B movies, and Gates mainly just stuck to there's 3 different shows where she plays a judge. But I really dug her NCIS guest spot, even though it was literally a one and done. It's just some of them can literally just clear a room out, even if there's really just not much to that role. It's they just enjoy this process so much. And there's others who, like you say, you're well, at least we'll go back to the show that put you on the map. And you get a pass just because you're awesome people and, got to work.
Yep.
So I guess that's a good segue to Deep Space Nine, unless I could talk about Nurse Okana, but.
No, it's perfectly good. I mean, we can't go head over heels about everybody. We just got to hit the highlights.
Pretty cool cast.
So
yeah. And
one of my favorite characters from Deep Space Nine is the crossover. I think Miles O'Brien is a great character, and I love Meanie in the part.
And that says a lot, because at first they weren't sure if he was playing the same technician or what have you, or what to do with him. And there's times where he seems to be emulating his the Scotty on the original, and then eventually they're just no, let's seriously just have him be the guy who often gets taken over by an alien of the week, or has to help LaForge repair data or rescue someone from a shuttle crash. Just he's the guard dog. And then he comes to DS9 and he gets to be way more witty and way more is hey, I'm not here to be just the maintenance man. I earn my 9-to-5 living.
There's just something about the way he plays the part that's so affable. He almost reminds me a little bit of a guy who he appeared only in 2 episodes of the original series. And I don't know the actor.
I know who you mean. Yeah.
The character of Riley, his name was Robert O'Reilly, was the actor. And he was singing. Remember, he turned off the engines. He's but he was a great character.
I think Robert O'Reilly's the guy who played the Gowron.
Oh no, you're right. I'm looking at the wrong.
But he's a good actor too. But yeah, no.
His name is Bruce Hyde. Played Kevin Riley.
I think so. Yeah, and same kind of deal. It says a lot when you can make an impression on that, even back in the day of syndicated TV shows. And
yeah, 2 episodes, and you just remember that character. And something about Meany's O'Brien. I'm glad they kept him around long enough that it got to shine through, because he's a very affable character.
Oh, totally.
And a great actor.
And same kind of deal. When you get to DS9, basically, at that point, they're basically the equivalent of here's a trading post, and here's all these guys. They're basically space station cops, keeping order. And then, like you say, it's so funny. I look at it now, and you get the whole gist of the Kardashian Bajorans, and they kind of feel growing up, I always got kind of a Bosnian and Serbian kind of attitude from them, or Jewish and Muslim.
Yeah,
standoff
it's
culture.
Nice that there's a Star Trek that actually takes on both a kind of a bit of a political and a spiritual context.
Oh, totally. Because they would hint at it on the first 2 shows, but it was always resolved, or they would only just space it out. Like Kirk's on trial this week, or Data's got to answer for accidentally, killing an ambassador who he didn't actually kill, but it looked like it, stuff like that. And yeah, here they're doing this constantly on a weekly basis. And nowadays I get more of a Palestinian and Israeli kind of feel from them now. It's just, that's just how hot the tension is between both of them, and that they absolutely refuse to acknowledge each other as people. They're just, the hatred is just,
and because of the spiritual aspect, you can see the connotations to different religious beliefs as well.
Mm-hmm. One minute they're freedom fighters, the next minute they're sponsoring guys who are basically terrorists,
right.
Or hypocrites going too far and revealing that they basically have no double standards. And it's a perfect illustration of today's climate, where we constantly see one of our Democrats we want to support get bribed, or a conservative who you can't tell if they're old school or if they're an alt-right nut job. So it's just very daunting, it's just, you're seeing guys who basically they don't have a resolution. They have zero apologies either. It's like they kind of have to be, in order to maintain kind of power. They have to be proud of who they are, even though they're can easily, you constantly see them, the actors, and there's too many to go into.
So which performances really, brought that out the most for you?
Well, obviously, I really feel like the show, even on a rewatch of it, really takes off when Worf joins, because he's just, rekindling his friendship with, O'Brien, and again, just realizing it's Next Gen 2.0. But at the same time, on this, I always admired Terry Farrell, who had done Hellraiser Free and has since then done a bunch of sitcom work and TV movies.
She was great
as Dax, because that goes back to even what you talked about before, just like how you got, again, all the cyborgs and all the other shows, and Spock. She's having to do the whole, before they paid tribute to this on Stargate, is like, I'm a trill or something, my species just, takes a human host, and I become that persona over time. It's like, that's not easy to play. You got the freckles to start off with, but then you have to essentially say, okay, here's why I do this or that, or I'm of this athletic nature. And once again, she was another person, did not get along with Rick Berman, because he just wanted people who were very athletic and beautiful looking. And she's like, I need you to respect me as a person first,
Right.
But like you say, all these guys are coming from non-sci-fi universe. Mark Alimo playing Ducat as the Cardassian, has to basically play a royal, ruler. And Avery Brooks, he was just known for playing Hawk on the what's it called? I just had it. I know this name. The one detective show with Robert Ulrich.
I'm not sure.
Oh, good. They even did a Marky Mark movie on that was inspired by that. It was, either way, pretty cool how he goes from being a private eye to being, again, space station captain. And it's just like, again, that's not an easy persona to play. And
yeah, and I thought the character of Odo had some of that too, being a changeling. I thought he brought a lot of gravitas.
Spencer for hire. That's what I'm thinking.
What?
Spencer for hire. That's what I'm thinking.
Oh, right.
But yeah, I mean, same deal. It's like I'm playing. It's kind of like when you're a politician and you're trying to say what you stand for versus what agenda you're running on. It's like, here he is, first black space captain. He's having to say, no. Something's changing, but again, don't treat me any different than you would, white captain.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like and totally different kind of persona. He's playing the reluctant yet noble and strong warrior. He's like, I don't want to have to do a measuring contest, but that's exactly what we're going to have to do this week. Unfortunately, it's escalated this far to where basically it comes down to whoever makes the final chess move, and having to be a gentle father who is having to even just be playful with his kid and just say, hey, whatever you want to do, don't, just because I'm widowed and I'm busy on this space station doesn't mean you can't come forth. And the actor, Surak Lufton, who played Jake, I think he definitely gets the most points as playing a kid, kid actor, because he's having to, play a guy who's hanging out with the Ferengi and doing all the other stuff. Just he's growing up on a space station, and learning from different cultures more so than he would if he was on a basically segregated human Starfleet school.
Right.
He's having to hang out among all these weirdos in space and realize, okay, the world's not as small as I make it.
Definitely.
But like you say, I mean, O'Brien, just a good transformation. And what's your take on Nana Visitor's portrayal of Kira?
It's good. Like I said, for me, there's just certain things that stand out, and then the rest of they're just they're good. I think that
they're acceptable, but you don't necessarily think of them right off the bat. Like I know a lot of people nowadays, I see a lot of people, and instead of referencing all the other ones, like growing up, I guess you could say my favorite was Bashir, even though I know some people can't stand him because the first few seasons he's basically just a horny guy just trying to get laid. And,
oh, right. Yeah, exactly.
And as he goes on, he kind of becomes much like Bones, where he can be more amusing and do the love-hate relationship with O'Brien and trying to, flirt with Dax and later, dates Kira. But like you say, it's also even more interesting how I see a lot of people, they'll often quote something by Odo or Quark. So it's wild how the Ferengis and the Changeling have become more popular as time gone on. And I'm like, really? Okay. I wouldn't go that route, but I kind of get it. It's a different era embracing this older show. So I get it's kind of the same thing with Voyager. I mean, there are a bunch of standout characters, but it's so much competition, from those first two shows.
Well, let's see what we've got to cover with our time left. So for me, Voyager's pretty easy. I already said I like Jerry Ryan a lot. She's easy on the eyes.
And she had a lot working against her when they just wanted to add more beautiful people, and yet the writers were smart enough. It's like, well, she's going to be beautiful, but she's also going to be, much like Data, a cyborg who's being rejected by the crew.
and she has a lot of Spock in her too. She's got a lot of her human fighting against her.
Especially how she'll state her lines. She definitely went for that same aura as like, if you think you know me, you don't.
Yeah. So I think Kate Mulgrew did a great job as a captain. I thought she was really good.
The same kind of deal. Lots working against her. Everyone's politicizing. Is like, okay, first female captain is like, yeah, but I'm just going to play
she really, I never saw her waver or not do a good job, but it's good to remember that they did cast that French actress first, and after a couple of days of shooting, they pulled it. It just wasn't working.
Love Jacqueline Bisset, but within like 48 hours, you're like, danger, Will Robinson, we need an emergency.
Wait, that's not the right name. Hold on.
Not Bisset. Okay. It was someone else, though. It was some.
It's that French actress. She's in so many. First Janeway.
If it wasn't Jacqueline Bisset, but yeah, I know what you mean. Is like the actors had to realize. I mean, they understood it, and they're like, okay, you kind of gotta really want to stick with this.
Here it is, Genevieve Boujou.
That's who it was. Yes, and she took it kind of out of peer pressure, and then just find out the hard way. Hey, we're gonna have to scrap this whole episode and redo it with a different person.
And I gotta say, no matter who you love on this show, I don't think anybody's gonna argue with me that one of the just great characters that's beloved and you just can't get enough of on Voyager is Picardo as the Doctor.
Oh,
that
totally.
Character is so great.
And just so wacky. I mean, yeah, he's as smart as Jordy or Bones, and then at the same time, he was a study, much like Gage Mcfadden, he was studying to be a doctor in real life, and then just the acting bug took over midway through college, and he can actually sing, and it just be wacky how they try to work that in. And like you say, I mean, much like we said with Enterprise before, is just the rest of the cast kind of just fades into the background because the writers were just, so much under constant pressure, and not after a while, Berman the producer was a dick and decided to say, I just personally don't like these guys, so they're going to get less screen time, up the ratings. I'm like, that's so inconvenient to the rest of the cast.
Yeah, that's pretty lame.
And I mean, upon a rewatch of the last year and a half, I was finding myself kind of liking Paris and Chakotay and even the guy who plays Harry Kim a little more. But I can see why I had the misfortune of seeing later seasons first. Not at their best necessarily, and so it's like I would always find the acting kind of to vary at times, like, or just it is an interesting idea but very annoying outcome, and so you just had to just say again that there are some good episodes, but there are some bad episodes, and you got to navigate. And it's kind of like with music, you got to decide what your playlist is once you listen through it the first time and say, okay, skipping those 5 songs, going to enjoy these 4 songs that are this season.
Right. So speaking of loving songs and hating songs, we're talking about episodes, but man, when it comes to the fans, there seems like a huge split on Discovery. There's just people that just love to trash it and loathe it and hate it, and other people that like it.
It is weird because it's like it's got kind of the lens flare, kind of like the reboot movies, and yet, I mean, we can get to those in a sec, but yeah, it's like I had nothing wrong with Sinija Green and Jason Isaacs, who we already know from stuff like, The Patriot and Harry Potter, and here he is, going against type, not playing a bad guy, and here he's playing a heroic captain who's kind of full of himself.
But then turns out to be not what we thought.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, and so again, these characters, it's just very complex because there's times where it just feels like other shows like Farscape or even Battlestar, and you're having to remind yourself is like, okay, again, it has to be different, and at the same time it's so different, it's kind of track and name only. So I mean,
I have to say, when it first started, I was pretty damn excited. I thought, hey, look, this is a reboot. It's not a reinvention. You're doing the exact same stuff, but with more modern special effects. Yeah. And you're in the same universe. So when they brought in Rainn Wilson to play Harry Mudd, he did such a great job, and I was so excited by that.
Yes.
Super fun. Starting the Klingon War, I thought was right on target.
The one guy from Broadway, he had been in like the movie version of Rent, who plays the Doctor, kind of has a bit of spunk to him, and but like you say,
is okay. She's got to carry the whole show, and I think she does an okay job.
It's just extremely different. So this is basically where it comes into apples and oranges. It's like they're not playing these alien roles like we've seen actors play alien roles in the previous one, and and like you say, for once, the Doctor is basically kind of the unofficial captain of the ship. So it's a total change up of the whole formula everyone's used to seeing, and it is kind of funny how Star Trek's had all these progressive themes, and yet for whatever reason it was getting into political discourse on the internet. Is like, no, let's not get into toxic Star Wars fandom. Let's stay the course, guys. Let's have fun, or not.
Well, we're at a point now where it doesn't matter what fandom it is. The same thing happens to Star Wars with certain people attacking
Halloween recently.
Yeah, so let's just let those people go scream in their own universe, and we can forget about it.
Right? You guys can go in the corner.
They're in the alternate universe. They all.
The mirror universe.
We're the mirror universe where everyone's a bitcher.
Captain Bitch to the holodeck.
Whining and bitching alternate universe. Star Trek goes to visit that universe.
Oh man, does it? Yeah.
Let's see. But this show has some interesting casting. The Mary Weissman casting of that character Sylvia, is
she's been interviewed quite a lot.
None of this Rick Berman, cookie cutter, model type. We want somebody who's just more of a regular old human being. And
she reminds me kind of Marilyn Radskov from Larry Saunders in 24. Is just that kind of person.
She's lovely too in her own way. So
she can be adorable 1 minute and then kind of an average Joe the next. And it's like you say, breaking the mold up is like, okay, because you get into that just even with gangster and legal and even medical shows. Is like, why is everyone just way too beautiful for their own good?
Right, exactly.
Besides appealing to the investors, and it's like, no stunt casting here. A lot of unknowns and semi-knowns, and I do hope that we see more of the Rainn Wilson, because he took a beloved character and he just was able to make it kind of his own. And
well, I doubt we'll see him anymore on Discovery, but there's no reason why although I guess it would be going back even further in time. No, we're picking up on Discovery from Discovery right into Brave New Worlds where we left off. So Harry Mudd can still be there to run into again.
Here's hoping to something, because like you say, they already had the challenge of this is a totally different kind of track show. So
yeah.
We're having our own identities, so
we're in the Shatner Nimoy universe now with Discovery, and I like that.
Totally.
It's new cast with updated special effects, but we're in that same universe.
You have the right to be more experimental as opposed to, dear, we got to make sure this lines up with the, Klingon invasion of DS9, or what exact time that Janeway got lost in space, or when Picard first took over Enterprise D. You don't have to worry about any of that mumbo jumbo timeline, which is already complex as it is for trackers. So this is like, did I say it wrong? This is track your trackers as we're going.
Say what wrong?
I think I said, do we go by track user trackers?
Oh, right. Yeah, there was that time when if you said Trekkie, somebody would slap you upside the head.
I know. I've talked to some of the guys who have done track fan films, and a lot of them don't care, but there's others who are like, oh, no. Like, oh, come on. Let's not argue. We're all on the same page.
There was a time. I think that time has passed.
No, speaking of time being passed, so it seems like Star Trek for the reboot movie has kind of been in hiatus, but it's kind of interesting how everyone has kind of a like it or hate it mentality with those reboot movies. And at the same time, like, that's the reason we're getting more Star Trek, because it showed that the fandom's still out there. But I've said this before. Anytime I see the actors in a movie, I will always see someone like even acknowledge them. Like they know them from the new Star Treks. Like they'll see Carl Urban or Zoe Saldana or Chris Pine, and they'll be like, "Hey, Captain Kirk, you're her."
Right. Well, I'm not a fan of J.J. Abrams at all.
Oh, me neither.
And I do subscribe to the fact that he Star Wars the heck out of that first movie.
Oh yeah, even more than Enterprise.
Point, it's ridiculous. I have to say, the idea of blowing up Vulcan is about the stupidest idea that's ever been executed in a science fiction movie or franchise of any kind ever. It's the most brain dead idea.
It's just Eldaron in Star Wars, yeah. And
it's just insane.
And you don't think about it when going in it, but I mean, I didn't have too much of an issue with the lens flare at first, but at the same time, it just makes you kind of get more angry at the fact that it's just too much of a style over substance. They're trying to make the fights be too much like The Matrix. They're trying to do Die Hard in space every week, and I especially don't like Beyond, because that is, to me, is just Fast and Furious in space. I'm like, okay, so at this point, there are no ideas to consider. It's just mindless with Star Trek characters.
It's lost the focus on the humanism and just that things that made it Star Trek. It's just, let's just do.
Don't call it Star Trek if there's no philosophy or message to
they're entertaining movies. They just don't have the Star Trek spirit at all.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I think we even twiddled our thumbs. And I mean, obviously we're going to go over some of the other actors and leave them for another day, like Cumberbatch and Bruce Greenwood and Zoe and even Idris Elba, who's totally wasted. But I think I associate Eric Bana with the first movie a lot. And yet he just plays possibly the worst villain out of all of them. Yeah. And that all his scenes are on the cutting room floor, and just, you find out kind of the hard way on rewatches, like, the less you show of him, the more interesting the movie is, because there's just nothing at all to his character. He's just another crybaby who wants vengeance for the death of his wife and wants to annihilate everyone. It's like, that's just so boring. It's like Star Trek was always good when you discussed all these future war crimes and abuse of power, and when you do all this, he's just a tyrant, and that's all there is. It can't not feel lazy. And like you say, I mean, I really, without the dynamite effects and excitement and even the cast really biting into their roles, I really would not like these at all. I would just be like, okay, mindless fodder.
So let's stick to people. Somebody's going to be mad at me, but I don't care. Let's stick to real Star Trek, and let's just hit Picard real quick.
All right. Love you, Anton Yelchin. Love you, John Cho. But the roles are kind of beneath you. And I mean, Zachary Quino, I love what you did with Spock. But again, at the same time, like, the movies are just so different. We just got to gloss over it. But we may or may not come back to. So I think, like you said before, I mean, it started off with a dynamite cast for the first two shows, and then, from the rest of the time, it was kind of like it or hate it, and more about the stories rather than the cast from that point on.
Which one are you talking about now?
Oh, just with the first two original series and Next Gen, and then from that point on, it was kind of take it or leave it cast with cool stories, for the other spinoffs.
Right. And with some standout performances that really helped. And so with Picard, having Patrick Stewart and Jerry Ryan back, those are two of the best you ever had. And
it made sense. They're both Borg Collective guys, and here they are in a totally new world.
And even Brent Spiner back. I'd have to say, of all of the new actors on that show, the Cristobal character, the way Santiago plays that is a Han Solo character. He's super cool, and I love him.
Oh, totally. He was on a really good show I saw recently called Empire. It was kind of ABC's attempt to kind of be like Rome and Gladiator, and but in that role too. And it's like, he's done. You look at his resume, and you're like, oh my God, he's been in a lot of shit I've seen. And it just, like you say, there's just something about, he's just so comfortable being quiet and unpredictable.
You got to have a certain kind of quality to sit on a captain's chair with that one leg.
I'm sure that's totally the screening process with however they're casting it now. Is like, are you used to being in any kind of film set, whether it's out in the open and just spouting mumbo jumbo just so comfortably, People have had enough time, and I'm sure many actors who audition are already kind of fans, but some of them aren't. They're just trying to just go to the auditions just because they're, family or their agent says so. And what's your take on Ralphie, played by Michelle Hurd?
Wait, who?
Ralphie.
Which one's that?
Light skin, mixed black gal.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry.
Oh, good. I was already a fan of Michelle Hurd from Law and Order and Ash versus Evil Dead. So, I mean.
Yeah, and I love her in Ash versus Evil Dead. I find her a little, to be honest, like not believable on this show. Like, she's okay, but she's not grabbing me so far. And I know she's a good actress.
Okay, well, I think that's just it. Like, they kind of give an idea where her character was going and really only give her something to do kind of in the first half of season one. The first time she's basically, I hate you, John Luke, I'm a scientist, and now rest of the time she's just basically going along with him, not given much to do. But I don't know. I just really just in general like that actress, and I just kind of understood why they gave her that role. But who knows? I mean, this unknown, I think it's like she's part English, part Asian gal who was playing the other cyborg.
Yeah, she's doing a good job.
And she's an unknown, so like this is like her breakout role. She's done like just guest spots on like other UK TV, and you're like, okay, well, I just
and the trailer for the next season looks good.
Yeah, John D. Lancie totally playing his Q role like completely differently so far, it seems. And I'm not saying that just because of the obvious like hair change, but like, you know, Q was always just kind of I've asked people before, do you consider him a hero or a villain? And most often he's kind of an anti-hero. He's a neutral guy, and it's hard to think about at first given the amount of hurt he puts the characters through. But really, yeah, it's just it. He's kind of just a determining godlike judge, you know.
Well, that's the thing about him. That's where acting comes back into it. No matter what you think of the role and of the script that he's given, that actor just kicks it out of the park every time. Like, he's just so good that
every role I've seen him in, Stargate and even just other recurring roles. Yeah, Breaking Bad, when he's the controlling dad who has to stop his, you know, overdosed daughter from.
Mm-hmm.
And he, like you say, he has the. Yeah, that's totally it. He goes back to the actor handbook. It's like everyone secretly believes they're right at the end of the day. That's just all you can do.
Before we wrap up, I'm going to throw out two quick things. One, my all-time favorite now guest star ever, because I'm such a huge fan and I like his acting too. I adore having David Cronenberg on Discovery.
Yeah, who would have guessed? You know, horror fantasy icon guy, you know.
He played such an awful, evil, great villain in Nightbreed, and it's that same ice-cold quality.
Jason X, he plays the doctor who dies at the beginning. Yeah, it's filmed in Canada, so that makes sense why they got him on board.
Yep, absolutely. And then just now that we have a streaming service, it's just really cool to think that the Star Trek universe can do what we always wanted it to do when we were kids watching the original series. Like, what's happening in the Star Trek universe back on Earth? And what's happening on other starships?
Oh, 100%. What the books were only able to tell you, and then now... Yep. And I had one pal who got offended that it was on, you know, streaming only. He's like, do they not respect us enough as fans? I'm like, well, it comes down to everything that's sci-fi always gets canceled. It doesn't matter how they schedule. It just takes a while because people aren't sure if it'll get canceled or not. Streaming is the only card left to play. That's really the only reason you're getting more of it.
Well, and now you're seeing it premieres on streaming, and now they're up to season 2.
They can say whatever they want. They can go
they
deeper.
The first time they said fuck on Discovery, I was like, oh, that's awesome.
And I mean, it's so mild. And I mean, it's kind of like with all the sexual innuendo and even occasional violence. I would see some people get always offended when that was first the thing on track. And it's like, well, that's just it. It was just always good enough to where anything that went over kids' heads that parents weren't comfortable talking about, you know, there's something for everybody. You know, in Star Wars, it always had the whole, you know, it's like, okay, we're going to show violence, but we're going to just kind of show a lot of it off screen and imply it, you know.
Well, and that's part of Star Trek's humanism is like,
that's even part of growing up, you know. We're
going to have the first female first officer, and then the network forced him out of that. We're going to have the first interracial kiss. Now we have like openly gay characters.
Stuff that people are still uncomfortable for whatever reason.
Yeah, but then they don't know Star Trek. Fuck them. I'm like, that's what this show is.
Right? Why do we still have to talk about this stuff? And if you're still uncomfortable, literally just tune out now, please.
Well, no, go to the bitch universe. You have your own.
Go to the bitch ass universe. Yeah. And like you said earlier, I mean, again, these actors are just happy to play these kind of roles that otherwise they probably couldn't play for whatever reason. They want to go with someone who's just a bigger star who's overused, or like you say, I mean, you can just talk about just so much experimental stuff that, again, just often gets labeled as taboo, even though we're supposedly a more progressive society, you know. And I mean, I saw some people trolling Picard message boards, acting like it was such a laughable premise that he would become a cyborg. You're like, well, clearly you don't understand Star Trek. It's all about, you got to give up your old body and go different angles. And I don't know, you just can't entertain certain people for whatever reason. And you just don't know if it's that they're like the closed-minded individual tyrants of, on a weekly basis, who get taken down or what have you. You know, it just is like, are you just afraid of any kind of change? Because I mean, that's kind of, Star Trek is in many ways kind of a evolution of life. You know, the right people evolve and go through a different time vortex, and they're essentially just take away all the effects and the adventure, and it's basically a Frank Capra coming of age movie. You know? It's a wonderful track.
And now there's a different flavor Star Trek for every day. You know, you've got,
and that's what it was appealing in general. I mean, it sucks that the writers had to be creative the first time around to avoid cancellation, and just because the producers didn't want to lose the rights to the franchise. And now, like you say, I mean, there's something for everyone. There's a R-rated South Park cartoon, and then there's a G-rated, you know, Voyager continuation, you know, and then, like you say, we got Discovery, New Worlds, and Picard. That's 5 shows right now. You know, that's, anyone can.
And Section 31, and you know, there's no badass woman in the history of acting like the lead for that show.
I mean, that's kind of why I got even more interested in Discovery to begin with. I mean, I was kind of more on board Orville because it was kind of like Galaxy Quest. But yeah, I mean, Michelle Yeoh, I mean, she was such a fan favorite instantly. And I know people who kind of like with Crazy Rich Asians, I don't know why, they just weren't familiar with her Hong Kong work and co-starring with Jackie Chan and Donnie Yen. And it's like, well, I grew up on Hong Kong stuff. So even for those who didn't see the James Bond movie she was in, I was a fan for life. I thought, what an excellent actress, dramatically and as a action star. You know, it's just And so give her the lead in her own Star Trek show. Yeah, the first Asian captain. I mean, we've seen that, but they've always been just the supporting character. She doesn't get to be the supporting person anymore. She now gets to lead her own show. So I'm totally looking forward to it. I can't wait to review it and just, I mean, it's track. You really honestly can't lose most of the time.
Yep.
And so thank you for being on here. And I think you help, hopefully we help detail why we dig all these actors. Why, you know.
Yeah, at each point, it's when you connect to something, whether it's as a kid or as an adult, and it touches your heart in some way, then when there's variations on it that are respectful to the theme, you can just be excited about the blossoming of the whole thing into multiple new directions. And it can be very exciting. And then that's part of the fun of talking to you about it, is getting to revisit all of the ways that this
totally. And you have so much great just behind the scenes kind of filmmaking. We both kind of gone just mild past. I've done music videos and independent stuff and done extras work on professional stuff, and you've done all forms of walks of life. And so we kind of have a greater appreciation for how, you know, you go from being a mid-budget, you know, cult show to bigger budget shows, and now we got all kinds of different shows with different tones and context and methods to how they're making, and yet they're still kind of, it's just like one giant, again, piece of the pie, and it's telling the same thing, just all differently, and just such peaceful stuff, as opposed to, you know, you can enjoy Star Wars, the original, at least, for being a Flash Gordon type adventure, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's all kind of, well, we won, you know, the battle is won. And it's like with Trek, you get the whole, here's how you find everlasting peace and get along with different walks of life, let alone different types of people.
Right.
The different aliens are illustrating different kinds of cultures that we encounter in our life.
You know, it was my son, you know, showing him some key episodes of Star Trek that he loved. But the reason why he never got into the original Star Trek for him was he found the original Roddenberry theme of, like, here's a perfected society in the future too limiting. And then, for better or worse, as many problems as we had with Rick Berman, getting away from that a little bit and realizing, you know, no matter where you are, life has ups and downs. There is no real perfection. You just keep striving to get better and better.
That's
And
exactly what the writers had to do, basically. Brandon Braga learned how to be a better writer. Ronald D. Moore became an even more mature writer. You know, I wasn't surprised when I saw him attached to stuff like Outlander and all these other shows where he matured as a person, not just as a writer. And like you say, I mean, Berman, basically his restrictions, it just only made them be more creative with how they were going to go about it and not end it the same predictable way where someone beams up off a planet after a perilous mission. And I mean, Roddenberry, I mean, I don't know if you ever read the 50-Year Journey. It has a lot of great excerpts and interviews, and essentially they got to interview, again, Rod Roddenberry, who's overseeing Roddenberry Entertainment now. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, the reason Next Gen was such a rough first year was Roddenberry was kind of suffering from some kind of figment of dementia. Like one minute, this once progressive guy was slowly kind of losing his mind. So he'd say some sexist or racist kind of things that he normally would not have said. And
but also trying to hold something into a formula that, you know, worked as a kernel, as a seed.
Yes, so many.
You've got to break the, you know, the tree's got to branch out, and now we're finally getting that tree that's got all these branches and leaves and things that is just such a great universe. That's not, you know, the original vision is still there, but it doesn't restrict the vision the way it did, like in that first season of
1,000%. The lawyer was taken over, and so many writers owed their career to this. One of them, I think, later did Sliders and a bunch of other experimental stuff. And like you say, I mean, they would do the whole, well, you know, Berman just wants to, you know, thinks whatever's not broken, don't fix it. Don't bother breaking anything new. And like you say, Roddenberry was losing his mind on his last legs, and so many writers, they kind of just learned how to do office politics, let alone just they both owed their career, even though they did not enjoy their time in the first few years.
Well, hopefully that was the lesson of Enterprise too, is that when the writers finally got free reign, they cranked out one of the best seasons of Star Trek there's ever been.
Oh, totally. And I think it just didn't help that at that point, you know, the market was changing for what kind of stuff was on TV. You know, it was always on the verge of being canceled, much like some of the other earlier ones, but just even more constantly.
Right.
And like you say, I mean, I think they
were canceled. That's why they got they were canceled. So they were like, okay, write what you want. We don't care anymore. And that was a blessing.
It really was. It's just a shame that it kind of had to go that way. And at the same time, I mean, I see other people who actually say, I really like Enterprise final seasons. I'm like, why did it get so much hate? I'm like, well, just growing up, it just, we had too much of it all at once. We were getting over Voyager ending, and Next Gen had another movie. And I think now, again, the fan films just showed that after a while, just there was still a thirst for the franchise. And so, yeah, I like you, I'm really glad that there's all these different shows, but they're not repeating what they did before. They're not having even the same writing staff for each one. They're just having Kurtzman, who had worked on the reboot movies, just let everyone do what they want to do. It's like bring their own vision to the table. You know, you got campy with one of the animations, you got a serious but kind of Star Wars Clone Wars animation, and then, like you say, I mean, New World is going to be its own beast, and Discovery is going to keep being as different as it wants to be. And again, Picard is pretty much the next stages of the Next Gen crew, is like in a more gritty universe. So it's like,
and to have this Discovery now having a spinoff with Section 31, that's a whole new direction. That's, you know, based on this.
Expected to be more like the Twilight Zone and X-Files. It is like you're talking with the guys who have always been a kind of the NSA of Starfleet. You know, it's like the people we don't talk about, the men in black, the suits who are. Yeah. In many ways, I'm sure they might even bring in a few references to the over-controlling producers of Paramount's track. That'd be funny. That'd be funny if they went there, but that might be a deadly curve to go.
Well, I think you and I have set up one, but someday some Star Trek show is going to have to visit the bitch universe and slap some of those people around.
Oh, they totally will. It'd be funny. And unlike most sci-fi shows, I actually find the politics in Star Trek pretty fascinating because, I mean, that just goes hand in hand with the philosophy and the themes.
Yeah,
so it's like,
absolutely.
If they wanted to do a West Wing or Designated Survivor version of Trek, please sign me up.
I totally agree with you, my friend.
Let's have a side that represents the snowflakes. Let's have a side that represents basically the alt-right tyrants, and let's have the ones who are the outspoken liberals and the progressives who always get ignored, who are the only ones who are sane enough. Like, have the guys who are basically what Roddenberry would have done. And I mean, it makes sense why Roddenberry kind of created what he created. He was being a patrol cop, and he was basically seeing everything wrong with the 60s.
And it was the late 60s. So there was a lot of idealism, and he was, it was cool to have a cop that was willing to look at that side of things and not just be in that authoritarian mindset that they would have pushed him into being.
Oh, totally. And it's just so funny how you can just about find it comes a time where it's like every track show is going to have some revisitation of the themes, just like all the endless Law and Orders and ER type spinoff franchises. So it's like, yeah, I mean, you're going to have everyone revisit some kind of plot angle. I mean, all the other ones have had an episode where someone gets infected or someone forbids a certain operation because it's against their religion. I mean, you go all the way far back on recent revisits of the original track, the well-known hippie episode where they're all infecting the crew, I think is a perfect contrast to today's Corona society. No, man, it's not cool to take a vaccine.
It's so funny. You brought up the one episode of the original series that I have always rated as the worst of that entire.
Right, it's pretty outrageous and
so ham-handed. Like, oh, we're space hippies.
And it's just so wild too. It is like because they could have illustrated hippies in such a different way, and then they just chose to go all bonkers with that one.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh man.
Well, thank you very much.
Absolutely. So, Director Cohen, what do you got coming up? That if you want to promote anything?
Oh, I've been a retired documentary producer for quite a few years now.
Not tempted to revisit anything.
Yeah, the same as last time. I'm still working on writing a radio play with a friend of mine, and I'll pitch that in some future episode. But it's still in the development stages. And so.
Well, that's still cool though, because I mean, if anything, I'm glad that podcasts and even audiobooks are making people rediscover the older days of radio. It's like that's all everyone had. Just turn your antenna a certain way and listen in.
You got the point exactly. It's quite exciting now what we could do with audio that combines drama with podcast, and now with all of this.
Zoom has great sound quality that you can tweak.
And all of these platforms now have this surround sound and so there's a lot of exciting things.
It makes you wonder if the powers that be wanted to deny what we could have had all this time, and then now finally they're aching for it in ratings. So they're like, yeah, sure, do what you want. We'll throw money at it.
Well, yeah. Well, originally they canceled Star Trek, and now we have more than
we have too much, and it's great.
It's great.
Bring it on. Oh man.
Bring it on.
And I still have even hope for the franchise. I did a random poll and I just shared it in a bunch of groups. It's like, what's the best current franchise? And it had like 10 more. It like had like, I think 200 something votes. And it was like, that was 10 more than like the Avengers. Not as much as say Psych or Stargate, but still pretty big.
Nice.
Pretty big outcome. I'm like, okay, awesome. So there's a bunch of people who appreciate this still. It's not just, oh, my folks introduced me to it, I didn't get it. It's like, good. Someone gets it.
That's great.
I have hope for the future. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, talking about Star Trek in a time like this, and we can end with hope for the future. That's a nice way to
right?
feel.
You like to go to work and then clock out knowing that there's some hope around the tunnel, and there's not just this empty abyss of just sulking and just people just not getting along ever.
Yeah.
We'll return after these messages.
Hey, feeling down? Feeling low? Not enough podcasts about movies in your life? Why not try...
They must be destroyed on sight!
The new Podcast Cure-All, sure to get you right with the world and on a path to better living. We have exploitation, we have Italian horror, we have zombies, we have slashers, we have crime films, we have spaghetti westerns, we even have sci-fi and sex comedies. So take a dose of...
They must be destroyed on sight!
As needed, and let the hosts, Lee Russell, Daniel Harper, Paul Romali, and the odd guest host cure what ails you.
Warning, may cause atrophy, African consumption, black fever, bone shave, chin cough, colic, cramp colic, dropsy of the brain, elephantitis, grocer's itch, jaundice, mania, miasma, mortification, palsy, Pott's disease, rheumatism, scurvy, St. Anthony's fire, summer complaint, and worm fit in some people. Consult a physician before listening.
Did you ever see a film at such a young age it left you traumatized with cinematic wounds? Necrophilia. It's a dead issue, man. Don't push it. Cinema Psyops is a weekly podcast documenting an ongoing experiment on the mind of an unwilling test subject.
No one should have to watch this movie.
Oh, no one should have to watch this?
No one should have to watch this movie.
Surprisingly, it's not a topic that a lot of people really want to tackle.
I'm shocked, prudes.
I know, really.
Right?
It's the next sexual frontier that no one wants to explore.
I am, in the most sincerest of senses, disappointed in you.
It takes a powerful goddess like Connie, jam her arm down the monster's throat and kill it. Oh, I'm still tripping out over that. Even as a kid, I was like, I gotta find a girl like that. Every week, I get a new look of disappointment that I never thought I could get out of her.
Unimaginable. At 12 years old, you should not be watching this movie.
Obviously.
At 13, you should not be. 14, you shouldn't be. I'm not entirely sure even 17-year-olds should be watching this.
Just because you're offended by something doesn't mean that you have the right to demand that it doesn't exist. Watching this film again, I had all of this like little nerd glee with everything that kept
little
popping
history all popping up
absolutely.
at you.
So I totally loved this film.
Hey, I know why you couldn't see that. It's because your brain's warped from watching this shit at 12 years old.
Yeah, this is a rough movie. I told you ahead of time when we were getting ready to do it that it was.
How
could
you watch this shit at 12?
Because physical wounds heal, cinematic ones don't. Listen to Cinema Psyops.
Hey everybody, I'm Corey.
And I'm Zach, and we're the hosts of Podcasting After Dark, a cast dedicated to late-night horror and sci-fi of the 80s and 90s, often found on HBO and Cinemax.
You know, the movies your parents didn't want you watching as a kid. You can find us every other week on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and Stitcher.
This is what you want.
This is what you get.
It's time, let's check our queue, baby. Pair it with a couple brews, baby. We love good movies. We love the bad ones too. So we watch them all and pass their lessons on to you. Oh yeah. Everything I learned from movies helps to make life a little bit groovy. With a one-last plot holes of gratuitous movies. It's time to get busy with your friend Steve and Izzy. At eilfm.podbean.com.
Welcome to Who Was She podcast. I'm your host, Tara Jabari. After a decade working in documentaries, marketing, and all things digital media, I found that podcasting is a strong medium to share stories. After years of producing for others, I decided to start my own biographical podcast. Who Was She will focus on the life of a woman throughout Baha'i history. The first season is about Lydia Zemenov. Lydia's story explores the subjects of the power of language and faith. Her father invented the universal language Esperanto, and she came from a Jewish family and became a Baha'i. She grew up during World War I and was killed during World War II in a concentration camp, despite heroic efforts to save her life. How can one person's life intersect with so many others, connect across borders, and inspire a biography which inspired this podcast? Over the next few weeks, I will share her story with you and the lives that were most affected by her and those who affected her life as well. They include her father, Lydia Zemenov, her spiritual mother, American journalist Martha Root, and the Baha'i German soldier Fritz Mako, who worked for the resistance undercover while having to serve the Nazi Party. I want to thank the author Wendy Heller and George Ronald Publishing for their blessing to let me use Heller's biography, Lydia, The Life of Lydia Zemenov, Daughter of Esperanto, as a main and instrumental resource for this podcast. So please subscribe and learn about this amazing woman who traveled through 3 continents in an effort to bring unity through the power of language. You can also find more information on our Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest at Who Was She Podcast. Music was composed and performed by Sam Red. I am your host, Tara Jabari. Join us next time as we begin our journey about Lydia Zemenov.
The Jacked Up Review Show can also be followed on Facebook on both the page and the group. Feel free to chat, leave questions, make requests for future episodes. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you so much for your various support, and we'll continue to entertain the hell out of you. Till then, take care.